Hi everyone. So my name's Lucy. I'm the managing director from Truman Change, and I'm just letting everybody get into the room. So I wanted to say thank you very much for joining us today, and just kind of give a little bit of introduction of what it is that we're doing today. So we've started, this is the second in a series of what we're calling change chats, and it's just informal conversations with a small number of people to really understand how organisations have managed to make change happen so rapidly during such difficult times lately. And we've really seen some phenomenal change happening in the public sector, in the private sector, businesses completely pivoting and changing the way they work, the public sector responding at such a speed to the need of people needing to get support and help. So we wanted to just take a bit of time to learn from that and to speak to people that were in the thick of it and to see if we can do change differently going forward. Hopefully gone are the days where it takes 2-3 years to deliver a piece of change in an organisation. So today's theme is about leadership, and leadership is obviously tough and challenging at all times, but when it's during a crisis, I think that's particularly difficult. We've got a great panel today. We've got 4 people who are going to just share their reflections on how they found being a leader in the crisis and what they've seen from other organisations as well. And so we have Penny Strutton, who is from Forward, and she is an organisational development consultant and business psychologist, so she's going to be talking about it from that perspective. We have Alistair Sinclair. I can't see Alistair. Oh, yes, waving. Alistair is Cabinet Member for Communities and Social Justice at Lancaster City Council, so has been very much in the thick of that community response. And I'm sure he'll have some really interesting views about distributive leadership and sharing it out. We've got Norman Goodwin, who's the Chief Exec from Adoption Matters. Adoption Matters is a voluntary sector adoption agency, and they've had quite the nice challenge of a massive influx in demand in a lovely positive way. So he'll be talking from that perspective and from his organisation. And we have Tracy Manning, who is the Director of Resources from Filed Council, who
Hello, hi.
Driving forward the community response for Filed to make sure that their most vulnerable people are getting the support that they need. So I'm going to come to Tracy first, if that's okay, to just tell us a little bit about how the response has been for you and what you've seen in terms of leadership and what you think we can take forward from it.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. I should sort of like just outline at the start. My role in local government was leading what was called the humanitarian response to the health crisis. And towards the end of March, I was asked if I wanted to be the humanitarian lead for the council, which I thought sounded interesting, and obviously I wanted to help and pitch in. So I agreed to do that. And it changed so rapidly and so quickly that I suppose I'm still trying to process in a way what's just happened professionally over the last sort of 3 months. It required an almost kind of magical ability to transform things. It felt like overnight. And I mean, I've been in local government sort of over 30 years in total. And the type of role that I'm involved in now, although I have been involved in a partnership role previously, but my role now is around sort of governance in the main, which is really around a lot of policy and process. And you saw less credence being paid to that that you normally would in local government, because local government, by its very nature, tends to have a lot of policy and procedure that we have to adhere to. Which isn't a bad thing, it's a good thing, and that's why all those different things are in place. But when you're told that you have to set up a community hub that's got to be ready to distribute food parcels to the needy within almost 48 hours, a lot of that just goes out of the window. And in terms of leadership, there was a real need as well to have a great deal of emotional intelligence I would say, because there were a lot of people who you were turning to for help and support, that in turn were having to process what was happening to them, professionally, personally. It was something that affected everybody in a very unique way. And from that perspective, you had to recognise who you could sort of turn to support you in this role, because there was an element of risk taking in it. From the perspective of, you were asking really people to kind of like put themselves out there in the community, when most people weren't even crossing over the threshold of their property. You drove to work and you were only perhaps the one of 2-3 cars on the road. There was no one around, and you were having to find people to be willing and able to support you, that you felt perhaps had the emotional resilience at that point in time to be able to offer that, because you were asking them to go out and put themselves at a higher risk than other people certainly were at that time. So I'd say that it's also been a test of kind of like endurance from a leadership perspective as well, because it wasn't just a momentary snapshot of something where you perhaps needed an adrenaline response for 28, 48 hours, 72 hours. This has been sustained. It's gone on for a period of weeks, weeks and weeks and weeks, 10 to 12 weeks. So it's needed a great deal of endurance and knowing people's limits. So when people might have been able to help you at the beginning, recognizing that they might be becoming fatigued, and bringing different people on to help you and support you. And another really key things for me have been around agile working. We've done a lot of work around our workforce being set up to work from home. Our community hub has had a call centre element, and all that has been done by team members working within their own homes. So, and that was a major thing to organise. But another great thing that we must never lose sight of as we move forward is the community goodwill that we've been able to harness. Because here in Fylde, we have had tremendous support from community organisations. Some of the usual that we have worked with, like the food banks and voluntary groups like Rotary, but we've had new groups set up, and new groups that have set themselves up to help the community. A real community spirit that I've never really seen the like of before. And if we keep hold of anything, for me, we must really keep hold of that. So it's just been a great team working response across the council, across the community, across our partnership organisations. I think there's a lot for us to sort of like learn, and it's kind of reinvigorated my passion for local government, because a lot of what I've been doing in the last 3 months is the whole reason why I came into local government 3 decades ago. It was to get this sense of helping others and working together for the common good and common purpose. So that's my kind of perspective on what's just happened. But as I say, I am still trying to process it from both a personal and professional perspective.
Thank you, Tracy. So some great comments there. I think the stuff around emotional intelligence is huge, and that test of endurance, and we're not even at the end of it yet, which is difficult for everybody. And I think that acknowledgement around knowing people's limits and knowing that this epidemic has affected everybody in some way on a personal level. So it's really key, I think, as a leader to be able to understand that. Alistair, can I come to you just to pick up on those comments around the community, because I know that that's where your expertise lies.
I wouldn't go so far as to say expertise. Unlike Tracy, I'm new, really new to local government. I only became a councillor last May, and at the same time became a cabinet member for communities and social justice. So the world of local government from the inside is really new to me. From the outside, I've worked in the voluntary sector for a long time, and engaged in sort of community development for a long time. So I have the perspective, I suppose, of someone coming in new with a little bit of an outside kind of eye. And I think it was a reflection of my experience around community development. I ended up as a cabinet member. But it's been a bit of a roller coaster as someone new to local government. In May, we didn't have very long before we went into a general election. And then just kind of come out of that, and then we found ourselves in a pandemic. I guess personal reflections. There was an element of shock. It's a weird one, really, because it was coming for a while. We saw, most of us, I think, saw the writing on the wall. Our government were a little bit slower to recognise the seriousness of that writing. So it was a weird situation of going from, there's a sense of impending kind of crisis, and then all of a sudden it kind of weirdly exploded. We had the first week, it feels like a long time ago, and I really do relate to the endurance bit of it. That sort of first phony week when we were social distancing and not social distancing. And we had to convene. Well, we had a council meeting and had to reconvene and reconfigure to have a representative sample of the council in the council chamber. So we would maintain, kick off social distancing. And then the following week, we had lockdown. And I can only talk from my perspective. I mean, as far as leadership, and there was a call on Friday, you hosted a call, and we had the chief exec, Mark Davis, who's director of communities, and they talked about what they did. And I have to say, how impressed I've been with our officers, with the council. They had a level of preparedness because of the resilience, because of the flooding we'd had in recent years, and they had relationships that they could fall back on and rely on. So from as far as the immediate stuff, and our priorities were number one, vulnerable people, our businesses and our core services. They had planning and they could adjust quite quickly. But what they had was relationships with the voluntary sector. So we had Morecambe Bay Food Bank, and we mobilised quite quickly. So as far as from an officer perspective, it's been incredible to see the work that's been done. I found myself as a community member, community cabinet member for communities, initially in the first kind of week, going, what do I do? I'm at home. I'm behind a laptop. The leader of the council kind of takes on executive sort of powers in a sort of crisis situation. So there was an initial kind of week of what's my role, and I kind of fell back on engage with the community, communicate with the community. So that's been my focus for 12 weeks. In the first week, so the week after the phony social distancing thing, we convened 2 meetings, one for our kind of Lancaster Morecambe community faith sector. This is online. Another one for our rurals. And then we expanded that, recognising that Lancaster and Morecambe have different people engaged in different ways. So we established a regular weekly meeting with in Lancaster, with rural, with Morecambe, and we've maintained that. That's been kind of my focus, along with a couple of other cabinet members, to communicate as much as we could with the faith sector, with the community sector, with people out there. In the first instance, so they every single week knew that there was a place they could go to ask questions and get briefings from a council perspective. But probably most importantly, from our perspective, we could hear what was going on in their areas and respond quickly, agilely, to what was happening. It became apparent that, say, with regards to, say, our rural areas, that they stepped up from the off. We have something like, I think, over 2,000 people who came forward to volunteer to support the COVID-19 effort. We have around 1,000 people scattered across our rural areas, part of community groups that established themselves within a week, providing support to people, collections, deliveries, shopping, and similarly in Lancaster, groups were established. So mostly, I guess, what I've been focusing on is being available formally through those sort of meetings, as well as those regular community meetings. We've established a bi-weekly meeting for people who are involved in organising volunteers. So every couple of weeks we get those people together and we talk about the issues around volunteering. We've established another bi-weekly meeting around well-being and starting to talk about well-being during recovery and beyond, and starting to explore the fact that recovery is going to be a long and difficult process, and we need to kind of support as many places where people can come together in this weird world of social distancing, and also starting to look at how we can support some physical gatherings that support social distancing. So reflections, it's been a time where we've made new connections with people, but it's also a time when we become aware that there are other people who are excluded from that. This type of communicating favors the more confident. It certainly favors, obviously, the more digitally included. It isn't the be-all and end-all of engagement, but it's been a useful tool in breaking down some of the barriers that we had between some agencies and between some communities. I don't think I'll waffle on anymore. It has been, and I'll go back to what Tracy said, a difficult process because there is a level of endurance. Even when you're stuck at home behind computers, there's a level of disconnect that you feel in Zoom meetings. You're not engaging and having the kind of interaction on that sort of human level that you get in the day-to-day, and it wears you down. The effort of Zoom meetings can itself be wearing. So whilst it's a tool, it also brings a lot of challenges. And if this is going to be the new normal, we have to find different ways of responding to those challenges. So I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Norman, I'm going to come to you next. What are your reflections from leading your organisation through a crisis?
Well, I think I'll have to start by saying that we are a very different organisation to a large local authority, and I guess that the challenges are slightly different. Also, those challenges are slightly different in as much as that we're technically not harnessing a community to engage in some of the stuff that Alistair and Tracy have talked about in terms of food banks and getting to people on a day-to-day basis. So we are an adoption agency, and we are working with regional adoption agencies and local authorities in placing children and finding families to offer those families to local authorities and regional adoption agencies. So and as our work is primarily with regional adoption agencies and local authorities, we work quite closely with a number of those agencies. And it's interesting looking at this perspective across a much wider horizon, in as much as we might be working with 60 different, well, maybe 30 RAs and another 30 different local authorities. So, and it's fair to say that most have been quite different. And there has been a sort of, I started off this process by thinking about the responses from 30 different regional adoption agencies primarily. And about, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks later, I had to review my thought that despite the fact that there's maybe 23, 30 different responses from RAAs, there are different responses within each of those RAAs, because in each of those RAAs there might be 5 or 6 different local authorities represented there. And within each of those local authorities, you might have 10 to 15 different workers that you might be negotiating or working with. So when you start to add that up, the variations multiply quite significantly. So you can actually have an RAA that might have a view on something that may not actually be shared by each of the different local authorities, that may not actually be shared by each of the individual people who are working on that local authority. So that's been quite interesting, and looking at how that has happened on the ground. I think the other thing for us is or for me was around we are an organisation which is a sort of voluntary organisation, but we carry out a statutory function. And initially there was some interesting discussions about our status as a statutory, quasi-statutory organisation in terms of doing what we were doing. And whilst we are all, or most of it, quite a significant number of the people are social workers by profession, and by definition are key workers, there was quite an interesting discrepancy as to how we were treated, as to how agents of the local authority were treated equally as co-workers. And I think that even within local authorities, I think there was an interesting division of how safeguarding workers were seen, as opposed to people thinking, well, adoption is a nice easy bit of work, but actually the significance of adoption workers in moving children forward, difficult placements of children need to be resolved. Children's lives are really important, and the sort of struggles of getting those children moved forward, which would have an impact on fostering placements in local authorities, which might have an impact on children coming into the looked after system as a result of some of the social issues incumbent on COVID-19, and that cycle of things that need to be worked through. So that was a sort of an interesting observation. I think so. We were, somebody, I think Tracy talked about the sort of agile working. We were we are an organisation that is a bit of a hybrid, that it has some quite, we have some quite significant technology, and we literally moved on from 3 or 4, 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. We sort of left the office, and on Monday we started to work from home, and that was fine. It was we were able to do that because we had the telephony and the technology already in place that allowed us to do that. So we felt, having invested in that over a period of time, we were quite well placed to do that. And I mean, personally, I spend quite a lot of time in meetings all over the country. So on one day, I had 4 meetings, all by either Zoom or Teams. So sort of reflect on what Alistair was saying, which is a bit of an endurance. But actually, those 4 meetings, one would have been held in London, one would have been held in Nottingham, one would have been held in Durham, and one, I think, was my office. So I was able to do those 4 meetings in one day, which under normal circumstances might have taken me 4 days to do those meetings, because the travel time to get to London or Durham or wherever else I was going allowed me to do 4 meetings in one day. So I quite like the fact that I don't have to travel, which is quite interesting if you're locally based, and dealing with your job in a community. Some of those issues probably don't apply, but I've seen quite a difference in that. So I actually feel quite refreshed. The fact that I don't have to be on a 6 o'clock train to get to London and getting home at 9 o'clock at night for an hour or a 2-hour meeting. So I'm quite positive about that. I think the other I'm interested and have tried to look at the difference between leadership and management, and that I see or have seen that managers tend to, and maybe this is an interesting reflection on where you come into the system and where you see it, but I've seen managers really go to terms with coming up with policies and procedures, some of which have been just about creating policies and procedures to cover their backs to some extent. And I would like to think that leaders are a bit different from that, which is a sort of, you're sort of, that management of creating policies and procedures is a bit from leading from behind, whereas I like to see sort of leaders leading in the front with vision, and I'm not sure how much of that we've actually seen. And I think as we reflect going forward, will we sort of be looking at what if you keep doing those policies and procedures, it's a bit about analysing the results rather than what we've actually achieved. So I think that's one of the other things that I've been interested in. And I think one of the final things that I'd quite like to say is that as I've reflected on this, I've been really impressed by some of the people in my own organisation who have risen to the challenge, and the fact that we have been, in a sense, forced to go into looking at different technological sort of modes of, or modus operandi, has really inspired some people to develop a lot of things virtually and online. And I really looking forward to the day when we can be sitting reviewing whether or not we might want to go back to what we did in the old world as opposed to what we might do in the new world, or a bit of a hybrid of both. And I think that some of those creative things in terms of presenting information much more online, holding groups and things like that online, and getting people to develop ways of doing things has had an effect on the number of people who have come to our organisation. And at first I thought that people were bored with maybe looking at Netflix or some other thing, and crikey, we'll go and do a bit of exploration about adoption, and we'll join a few information events. But actually, on reflection, the quality of some of the people who have come into those events has been really quite impressive. And I'm encouraged by the fact that people have really taken time to research and have come with a very positive attitude, have done a lot of work, and are flowing in terms of their in terms of what happens next. Sometimes you're really pushing people to do the next bit. People have had time, people have had commitment, energy to actually do things, and we've seen a much quicker flow through of some of the things. And I think we've probably doubled the number of people who've made inquiries about adoption throughout that period of time. So I'm sort of sitting in the midst of quite a number of different things that have really given me food for thought, and I think that there's been some really interesting things that we've learned from, and it's sort of reinforced the fact that for me it's allowed some of my sort of immediate subordinates to develop some of their management and leadership skills to actually take on board some of the things, which has been really helpful. So I don't feel as if other than maybe on that first Monday, having this is what we're going to do. A lot of the things have really moved forward, and I've been quite encouraged by that.
Thank you, Nolan. So I think we've got some themes running through, definitely. I know that Tracy was talking about how it's almost become slightly less important, all those policies and procedures, which Norman, you certainly alluded to. And also a lot of things in there about people, about communication, about relationships, well-being. And I do wonder if perhaps that increase in people wanting to adopt is because I have so many people I speak to, including myself, people are sort of rethinking what's important to them and rethinking what they want from their life. And maybe there's quite a lot of people that want to get off that rat race and invest more time in family, which is probably a very natural response to the crisis that we're having at the moment. And Penny, I'd love to hear your reflections, because I know you're working with different organisations, and I'm sure you'll have picked up some themes there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Share with us.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just picking up on just what you've said there, Lucy, I think I've been running, I'm a co-owner of the East Midlands HR Network, and we've been running a number of roundtable discussions, and we've run some other discussions bringing in people from across the country. And I think people don't want to be doing the travel anymore. I think that they realise that they can do so much from home, that they're able to see their family, they're able to, do their hobbies, obviously when lockdown's a bit more relaxed. And they're also more aware of the environmental impact that we all have when we're getting on a train and flights or whatever on a regular basis. And I think people have really rethought how they want to live their lives. And I was actually thinking the same thing as you, Lucy, in terms of Norman's comment about the inquiries increasing, is that, I think people are really rethinking what they want to do. And I think it's encouraged an awful lot of reflection for everybody around actually why are we here, why am I doing what I'm doing, and what can I do differently. So I think, really, really resonated with me there. I suppose I'm a bit different, in fact, in the fact that I am a consultant and I work with organisations large and small. One of the programs I do offer is leadership development, and I tend to go into smaller organisations and work with the leadership team over a 6 to 12 month period of time. And within that time, we'll do a lot of personal reflection. So I've got a psychometric tool that I use, personal coaching, and a lot of group development work as well, to really try and build that cohesion with the leadership team. And actually, these last couple of months, I have been amazed at how, I would say, 3 of my clients have responded. All of them are small, medium size, so around the 100 employee mark. Very different industries. And so the one organisation, I spoke to the MD about a month after lockdown, and he says, wow, he says, I just can't get over how quickly we can make decisions, and it's all via Zoom. He says, usually we would go meet off-site for a day. So if you think everybody's traveling to an off-site, paying for that off-site, and then spending a whole day, setting objectives and working through problems and coming out with solutions. And he says, we're doing it in 3 hours over Zoom. He says, these meetings were so decisive, we're so on it, we're communicating, we're talking about it. And he says, it's been really enlightening and really enjoyable. And he says, I've also been able to really flex my leadership style. So, he's been able to be really assertive, but also empathetic. And I think this is so important in times of a crisis with leaders. And, he's the MD. You need somebody who's able to actually go, no, we're doing that now. And bringing everybody together, collaborating across the company, bringing in the right people to help with that decision making, help with the problem solving, and actually devolving power to them to get things done. And I think he's felt enormously rewarded in his role as leader over this period of time. I think the impact of COVID on the business has been significant, and they've had to respond quite drastically to it, but they've done it as a team. And I think that for me has been really rewarding for me to see them actually function in that time of crisis in a really cohesive way. Another of my clients served the hospitality industry, essentially. So you can imagine when everything shut down, that had a massive impact on his business. And again, I was amazed to see his response. He basically pulled together significant leaders across Nottingham and pulled together this amazing concept called Open Kitchens. And I don't know if you've seen it because it's been on the news, it's gone national, where they're getting donations from the community to keep restaurants serving food for vulnerable people. And he's headed up that initiative. And I just think, being able to pivot, to be able to actually go, right, if we don't do something, we're gonna go under. So that innovation, that creativity. But I think what's been so key and obvious, not just with this client, but with so many people that I'm talking to and just what I've heard in the last half an hour, is collaboration. People are willing to get together to actually think for the greater good, for a win-win. People aren't out there to sell. They're not out there to win or to outdo one another. It's about trying to club together for the best of everybody. And I think that's been really remarkable as well. So I think collaboration has been massive. And for myself in my own business, the collaboration I'm doing with people up and down the country, the fact that I'm Nottingham based, working with Lucy on this, it's been really, really enjoyable. Being on Zoom has just broken down those geographical barriers and just allowed us to build relationships and to work together from across the globe, I suppose. My third client I was thinking of is a manufacturing client, and they've got lots of stock, everything closed down, and I saw an amazing initiative of theirs is to actually sell on their stock to other manufacturers who are low and can't get hold of the stock to keep their production lines going. So there you are, helping one another, but actually still keeping an income going. So real innovation, creativity, and agility. That decisiveness in the moment. And I think we all feel like we're running a bit of a race, and we're in a relay. We're almost handing the baton over and having a little bit of a breather and then picking it up again. I think there needs to be an enormous emphasis on building resilience and well-being. But again, I think that has increased a lot. But I think that, as I say, that agility, that decisiveness, that ability for leaders to actually release some of that power, if you like, and that decision-making ability to people across the organization has enabled that business to progress, to stay alive, to flourish. I think other things I've seen as well through the use of Zoom, which is really interesting because we're all so far apart, but actually through Zoom, it can feel a bit uncomfortable, but it's that focus that we have on one another, that people are having conversations with one another that they never had before. Because you would say hi at the coffee machine and off you'd go. Whereas now, if you're on a Zoom call, you spend the first 10 minutes having a chat. And I think people have said, I know my colleagues so much better now. And with that understanding comes empathy. So leaders, I think, are able to be far more empathetic and more towards the transformational leadership model than before. They're able to be authentic. We've all got our backgrounds. I know some of us will use fancy fake backgrounds, which I do sometimes when I'm stuck in my son's room because I can't get a quiet space. But I think, we're letting people into our homes and we're talking about our own experience of this. And, that could be the CEO, it could be anybody in the organization. And we're seeing each other as people and we're all experiencing this in our own individual way. And it's so individual. And it's really, I think, building that empathy and understanding. So we all feel like we're in it together. So those are my observations. And I think, it really has been exciting and rewarding to see leaders really step up. It really, really has. It's almost like working with people over a period of time. They suddenly have the opportunity to put it all into place and to really, it's a bit like an orchestra. Everyone's just, doing what they need to do and play their part, and the outcomes are remarkable.
Yeah. It does, that the part about the authenticity does resonate with me. And I know, Tracy, we had this conversation at the back end of last week where I do feel like I'm connecting with people more, albeit behind a screen. And, I will now do Zoom calls with no makeup on and a cat on my knee. And there is something about all of that, stripping away that professionalism, that actually is enabling people to connect on a bit more of a human level, which I think is a really nice thing. We have had a couple of questions in the group. So one of the questions is direct to Tracy, which is asking, has there been any conflict about how to manage? And actually, I'm curious about, for all the panel members for this, when you've been in the thick of it, of having to manage this change in this crisis, has there been conflict between people, whether it's members and officers or within officers, or how have people dealt with when people have had different ideas about how to lead through this crisis?
I think, interestingly, there's been a great sense of kind of cooperation across elected members and officers and community, because I think there was kind of like a general acknowledgement there that we were facing something that was kind of like totally unprecedented and really, really scary. So I think there's had to be an element of trust there. And we've had a great deal of trust placed in us from our elected members, as officers in those early days, to get on with things and deliver it. We've kept elected members in touch. Obviously, as things are sort of like normalising a bit now, that's a little bit more easy. But there were some real shifts that happened at our local authority. I think it was Alistair who talked about, as it kind of like unfolded, having emergency council meetings, and at Fylde that meant that actually there was delegated authority that was moved entirely from elected members making decisions, because we're in a committee-based decision-making structure, to officers. And that was based on trust, based on us, working with the elected members, obviously not seeking to abuse that power, but just a real sense of, we're all in this together. This is an emergency. What are we going to do to kind of like make this work so we can still sort of function and move forward as a very large scale, complex organisation that has had things really totally thrown into turmoil. So no, I've not seen conflict in that sense. I've seen people conflicted emotionally. I've seen people go through all sorts of different, emotional responses. I've seen people, step up and be incredibly resilient. I've seen people, facing things that, are just horrendous. And then, having kind of like a very human emotional response and, maybe kind of like being out of action for some little time. So I've seen people conflicted emotionally, but I've seen people trusting each other, working together and working collaboratively. It's been fantastic to see being able to provide that very kind of like immediate response.
Thank you. Do you have any comments, Alistair, on whether there's been conflict?
No, I think I'd echo Tracy, really. I would go back to the Zoom thing. It was Teams. We mostly use Teams. We really use Teams from a standing start of most of us never having used Teams. We were having Teams meetings all over the place. So, that first council meeting I mentioned, that was an example. There was unanimous approval for freeing up £1 million for vulnerable people, £1 million for business support. In previous days, that would have been a little bit inconceivable, but that was with the recognition that we were all in this together. And we followed that up by establishing, I think it was it twice a week or 3 times a week, a cross-party COVID Teams meeting. So we bring representatives from all the parties together. I think it was 3 times. I mean, we as a cabinet, when it kicked off, were meeting every single night, every day, 7 days. We did that for 4 or 5 weeks before it became every 3 days, and now we're down to once a week. We see each other via Zooms a lot more than we saw each other previously. I'd kind of echo what Penny was saying in terms of it's opened up connections outside of the organisation with health in particular, with around community safety partnership, with as I say, community. I know lots more people now. I've never met them in the flesh. I know lots more people now right across the district than I did previously, and there has been that will to work together. On this. It's also been an opportunity, I think, and it probably might lead on to the second question, to sort of introduce some of the issues that we're facing in the longer term future. But as far as, where we're at within the council, I think it's advanced understanding of some of those other challenges that we face. We've started to introduce that a little bit into some of these meetings. And it's been satisfying. The problem about the political system is quite often it's based on opposition, it's based on polarization, it's based on deficits, on the things that are different, when in fact, we do have a lot more in common. There's Joe Cox, I'm sure Lizzie was, we have a lot more in common than that, which divides us. So that bit's been great. It's just the challenges moving forward is how we can build on that.
Thank you. So our second question, which is a very good question, is from Laura Davis. A feature of leadership is about being able to paint the picture of what the future looks like. How do we do this when there is uncertainty and no clear end point? Does anybody?
Yeah.
Yes, Penny, okay?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting question. And I think, when we look at organizational leadership, it is about vision. It's about aligning people to a vision, building the skills around achieving that vision, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when you're in crisis mode, there's another concept called actually holding. It's a holding leadership style where actually you're keeping people in the present, and you're informing them what's going on. You're giving them the resources to do their job. You're devolving that responsibility to make key decisions, but with the right information, and being there to support, to encourage, to give feedback to around the far more short-term goals. It's about being quite realistic. And when things start to smooth out a bit, you're able to build smaller milestones towards what the vision could look like. But actually, when you're in it, it's about actually holding your team, supporting them, enabling them to be effective, giving them that reassurance. So I think vision is something which certainly you could have your values in a crisis situation and allow your values to direct how you respond. And obviously, your values are used to achieve your vision. But I think in that crisis situation, I think it's very difficult to go, yes, we still want to be number one, whatever, in the universe. It's actually about, let's survive. We've got these resources. We've got this, we can survive on 80% and for the next 6 weeks. So we need to do X, Y, and Z to help us. This is what you need to do. And to actually be really assertive, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. The true assertive is a positive trait. But supportive as well. It's really balancing that people logic opposite, I suppose, to help people get through it and to operate effectively.
And do any other panel members, Norman, would you like to add anything about leading in uncertain times?
Well, I think I would include passion with the vision, and I think it is very different to in my own organisation. That the structure is quite lean. So, you know, somebody could knock on my door and we could make a decision there and then. I don't have to go through various levels of management bureaucracy to cabinets to, you know, local council. You know, and I understand. So you know, I understand how that works. I'm not decrying it. I think that looking on from the outside, some of those things, which refers back to the last question, was about some of those frustrations in bigger organisations where some of that bureaucracy sometimes gets in the road, and you know there's some other bigger or bureaucracies like the health service and the courts, which I guess for us as an organisation, you know, how do you manage the frustration of wanting a health service to function in the way that you would like them to when they're coping with a pandemic? So that's an interesting conundrum. And an organisational structure like the court system is one that doesn't, you know, it doesn't bend very easily. Although, you know, we're now talking about maybe having courts outside court buildings and bits of hybrids of courts, and, you know, which is really encouraging. But it is interesting looking at large infrastructures and how we have been able to change some of those things quite quickly. So my question will be, how long will it take for us to go back to what we were used to, or will we keep some of the things, which is again thinking about, well, what will it look like in the future? And, you know, if we can carry on some of those things, I think it will be really good.
Can I just add? Yeah. I absolutely with the holding and pennies, and that's, I think probably my contribution there has been with those meetings and that holding is bringing people together and listening and doing that. And, you know, 52 community facing meetings later, I think we've established that. But the big bit that I think has come out of the process is how much, and I bang on about it, it's a term from asset-based community development, how much abundance there is in the community. Lancaster District Council would have not been able to deliver its support hub without the community. The core of its volunteer provision is a local church with 130 volunteers that was already in existence, coupled together with CVS, who had 800 people who approached them, tied in with the Morecambe Bay Food Bank with a project called Egg Cop. These things were already there. What we've discovered, and we'd started this before the crisis with the establishing of community connectors, people going out and connecting with the community. So again, that was really useful. Is what we've really kind of made more visible, and in asset-based community development terms, it's all about mapping, making it visible, making that abundance, you know, there, clear. We've further advanced that drive. And I think that's opened up the conversation around, well, you've talked about recovery. Lots of people are saying they don't want to go back to old normal. They want new normal. Lots of people are also aware that our economy is in dire trouble, and we need new ways of supporting our local economy. We need new models of community wealth building like we see in Preston and other places. So we have actually started to introduce, you know, some of these topics and themes, and they've kind of, I wasn't, if we had more time, I would have shared it, but we have started to in terms of answering the question, possibly starting to answer the question, how do you look for the future when there's uncertainty, is have this aspiration. And for us, we're calling it recovery for a sustainable, safe and socially just district, healthy, connected, empowered, enabled. So that's come out of the process of talking to people. We've identified core areas. The climate emergency is the core area. It's the environment that's it's all around us, and community as our second one. And the third is this working on local, new, different models of community wealth building. I think there are people with passion that we've identified, and there is abundance in the community. So for us, I think that's our little message of hope. The message of hope is actually you are able, and you have been able for decades to do many things that local government can't do. Local government, really needs to kind of recognise that its role is to enable and to empower, and connect and support. So I think that the silver lining to the crisis is that there are people in our districts, and I imagine right across the country, who have more agency now, who feel that they can do more than they could before the crisis. At the same time, taking away the silver lining, we're facing a very uncertain future. So challenges ahead.
Thank you. We just have one last question, which I'm going to ask Tracy to answer, because Tracy, you did speak a lot about emotional intelligence and how people were on different journeys in your organisation and everywhere. How do you deal with the heightened emotions and mental health impact on your staff and colleagues, given that they are present at greater levels for everyone right now?
I mean, what I've done when the people within my team, that's the kind of like the new team that I've been working with more closely throughout this crisis. I think when I've seen something is looming or facing them or has happened to them, I've kind of like given them the ability to, speak to me and have a very authentic conversation where, they've shared with me sort of fears and concerns, and I've shared, issues with them back, because throughout this whole thing, it has been extremely, scary and frightening, and some fairly, dreadful things have happened to people on a very sort of like personal basis. So for me, it's about sort of like being very authentic with people. I've not been scared either. Within reason, to let people know that there's an emotional response from me as well, into what's been going on. I'm not kind of like a brick, sort of like sat there where I can just have things thrown at me, and just kind of like have a very stoic response. Some things have happened to me personally, some things that have happened where staff members have explained about things that they've had to deal with from members of the community, some very kind of like, distressed individuals out there, struggling with things. And it's okay actually for us to have an emotional response to what's happening, because at the end of the day we are human beings. We do have an emotional response to things, and this has been absolutely unprecedented. So I think it's fine to show the that softer side of yourself. Not even necessarily, a more, feminine side. I've seen it from colleagues, male and female. It's okay to have vulnerabilities around what's going on. It's okay to articulate it. It's okay to share it. And it's okay to try and pick each other up. I loved that analogy about, holding the baton and passing it on, because it's very much felt like that at times, because when somebody perhaps has been, had a little bit more emotional strength, somebody might have been a bit of a lower ebb, and I love that passing the baton analogy, because it's felt like that's been needed not only in terms of energy levels, but in terms of emotional levels, of terms of what people have been going through, a real roller coaster of emotions, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think part of the thing that is so unprecedented about this crisis is it will have affected everybody. Every family, every household will have been affected in some way, and whether that's worry about, and I think it affects affects us in multiple ways. You know, there'll be lots of people really frightened for financial reasons. There'll be lots of people frightened for their own health, the health of family members. You know, it really is attacking everybody in a different way. And I think acknowledgement of that is really important for organisations, and to be realistic about, you know, how much you can expect of your team when you're working in that kind of backdrop. And I do think connection is really important, which is difficult because it's a very different kind of connection now than it was previously, but there is a beacon of hope there, I think, in certainly all the things that all the panel members have been saying today, and how they've been able to stay connected to people in these really difficult times. We are a minute over, and it pains me to draw it to a close because it's been a really, really interesting discussion. So huge thank you to all of the panel members who have taken part today, not just for your work today on this call, but also for people that are working in the community to respond to this crisis. You know, we're all really grateful for that. It's been fascinating. We've got a series of these talks booked in. The next one is culture change and context, which is really about how a lot of the change that's happened in organisations has been because of that context shift, and it's kind of empowered people to make decisions quicker. So we really want to speak to people about that. That is on the 23rd of June at 10:30, so you can book on that through our website. Please do let us know how you found it, and give us some feedback. And thank you very much. Is there any closing words from any members of the panel before we finish?
Thank you very much, everybody. I thought it was really, really interesting. Thank you.
Yep,
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you. Yeah, likewise.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you.